Hello and welcome to another edition of Formscan for IrishRacing.com. We're giving Emma Nagel a day off today. She's actually a bit poorly, but I will step in as your host. My name's Joe, and we've got plenty of cracking racing to cover this weekend, including the Coral-Eclipse, which we will get to later on in the show. It might be a bit of a disappointing betting heat, let's be honest, but we will be there to discuss it all with Johnny Ward. Johnny, how are you doing?
I'm good, Joe. Yeah, I was very disappointed that White Birch was scratched from the Eclipse. I was saying to Emma on our show on Monday, like I hadn't looked forward to a flat race in some time actually for White Birch to take on August Rodan in terms of like a mile and two race in England, two of the Premier Irish horses, and to see a real clash of a proper improving 4-year-old against this very well touted 3-year-old. It's not to be. But we still have a fairly intriguing Eclipse, if one that maybe lacks depth. And just let's hope for each way punters that the dead eight stand their ground.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, we will get to that race later on in the show, but we've got plenty of racing to cover, both from Sandown and Haydock for the Brits, and also Bellewstown. I know we've got a big handicap hurdle race to discuss. But first of all, let's go into the 150 at Sandown, Johnny. Now, here I thought Living the Dream was one that is going to be the favourite for this one, but disappointed last time out. I think it's probably fair to say. What was your take, and are you expecting a comeback here?
Yeah, just because the basis of his general consistency, that looked a run far too bad to be true. And I'm a fairly forgiving type with horses. If your consistent profile is such that you've one bad run, sent off fight for favourites, didn't kind of have the nicest break in the race, and to be fair, I think Sean Curran kind of looked after him. I'd forgive him that run, but at the same time, it's obviously a little bit of a doubt if you were to have a bet in this race. For all that, I suppose in general form, he's the one to beat.
And who else has caught your eye here? Any worthy challenges?
I like Twilight Call, to be honest. He's a horse that Henry Candy trained Airwave, and Airwave was the horse who had to come from behind. Twilight Calls isn't as good as Airwave, but he's not that dissimilar in the sense that he does give himself a bit of work to do, and he's a horse who stays on strongly in his races. The last day, Ryan Moore actually rode him in the King Charles III stakes. I thought he ran very well. He kind of never looked like winning, to be fair, but this is obviously a much weaker race, and you included this in some of the form study notes before the show. Do you like horses to stay on in the race? I absolutely do, and he might be slightly better if there's a bigger field and a strong pace, but on that run at Ascot, if Ryan Moore can get him into some sort of a rhythm, he will definitely be coming from the rear. There's no doubt about that. But if you can get into a rhythm and they come back a bit and there is pace in the races, there should be in a sprint. I think he's a reasonable chance.
And I mean, for you as well, just looking at the discipline, actually, I mean, 5 furlongs, are these the kind of races you like to get stuck into?
It's kind of hard for me, Joe, because I really do like sprints, and I think as a spectacle they're fantastic, particularly if you're at the races. But I'm not going to lie, my bias is very much towards Irish racing, and we very rarely have good sprinters. Like when Eddie Lynham had Soul Power, and then he had Slade Power, and Gordon Lord Byron was around at that time as well. We had a bit of a golden era of sprinters, and I used to love watching Soul Power run. But for whatever reason, we just we don't really have sprinters in Ireland. We tend to have more stayers than sprinters. You think even with a lot of sprinters they're not really bred to be anything special. They just turn out to be very good sprinters. Like horses are generally bred to be milers or middle distance horses. They're not necessarily bred to be 5 furlong horses, and we just don't seem to land on them in Ireland. So I like the division, but because I'm kind of Irish biased, it probably takes a bit away from it for me.
All right, fair enough. Well, let's move on then to the 225. We've got the next race here, the Coral Challenge. So again, for you, any particular horse that kind of stands out?
I really like Holloway Bay here, and Sam James is his regular rider, and I think I may not be alone in this race, because if you watch the race at Ascot the last day, he was drawn the near side. They kind of converged. As they did in a lot of the races. It was a 29-runner race to converge, but he found plenty of trouble in running, and he was probably, if you look at his profile this season, he probably was trained for Royal Ascot and was kind of trained to peak on that day, but I thought it was a very, very nice run. He's basically stayed on the same mark as you would expect. He's been rated higher in the past, and what are we now, 70 days from Ascot? If he can keep his form from the condition that Carol Burke produced him in at Ascot, I'd give him a very, very solid chance here under Sam James. A bit like my selection in the previous race, he'd probably be ridden a bit that way, but he's a proper mile handicapper with plenty of class, and I'd give him a good chance.
And also, I mean, looking at the Ryan Moore booking for this one as well, Perto did get the better of Holloway Boy last time out. So, I mean, with that jockey booking in mind, I mean, does that give a bit of a positive to Perto?
Yeah, like in fairness, Ryan Moore's ridden the horse in the past, and I'm not sure what other options he had in the race, but in fairness, you could make a case for Perto in the sense of upholding that form, because he didn't have the cleanest of races either. He was actually a little bit fresh early on, and he did beat My Selection pretty readily. But obviously he does get a pound of a weight difference, and I, I probably feel there wouldn't be an awful lot between them. But yeah, I would be just with the Carl Burke horse. But much respect for Perto, and Point Linus as well. I'd respect. Ran very well at Haydock the last time. Probably be better off stepping back up to the mile here.
Yeah, fair enough. And one question mark, I guess, just in regards to the form, actually, I just wanted to touch on that as well. The Roger Varian form isn't electric at the moment. So, I mean, when you're looking at the form, do you take into more consideration the jockey form, the trainer form? Does that ever come to your assessment, or is it all about the horse?
Oh no, trainer form would be a big thing for me. Like with Roger Varian, I think Andrew Bawley was included in the notes as well. I don't necessarily see enough data there to suggest that the horse are out of form. But when you 100% do have yards to go in and out of form, there will be bugs. A lot of trainers in Ireland will tell you stuff like rapeseed oil being grown beside yards will get into the horses, and horses in and out of form in yards is massive. Like, and when yards come into form, they generally do tend to fire. The problem is that you have to kind of detect this before it's kind of common knowledge. Kevin Prendergast at the moment, I'm going to Bellewstown tonight. I don't think he's had a winner yet this season until he's had now 2 from his last 3. Unbelievable, man. And that's not necessarily factoring in the price of his horse going to Bellewstown tonight. His horses are definitely hitting in form. Sometimes it'll have to do with the weather, as I say, whether there are bugs in the yards that are gone out of the yard and stuff like that. But it's a massive factor for me. But I don't see enough data to suggest Roger Varian's in trouble at the moment.
No, not right now. But yeah, let's keep an eye on it for sure. All right, let's move on to the Coral Distaff as well for the fillies and the mares. Now, again, Johnny, just take us through your line of thinking here. I know Clove Hitch has got a big fancy, a big chance in this one.
This is a good race. Just for Brian sends obviously over Al Riffer. We'll talk about him in the clips, and very few Irish runners actually. And in the Oaks at Haydock, there hasn't been an Irish winner since Park Express. And these are some good races. You'd imagine that there should be more Irish runners. Maybe it's reflective of the fact that the home competition is very, very strong. Unreasonable, who is the Irish horse going over? She's a filly by No Nay Never, and she ran behind a good horse, Taraba, the last. That was a month ago. She's actually quite straightforward, and if you're having a bet 4 places, if she comes under pressure, she does kind of find plenty. John and Tady Gosden strongly represented here with Spiritual and Regal Jubilee, and it's Regal Jubilee for me. I liked her on the last day behind Francophone. Was obviously very, very progressive. Regal Jubilee was a little bit unlucky in that occasion. She didn't maybe she wasn't unlucky. She wasn't unlucky in the sense that she would have won the race, but she would have gotten a bit closer. You might point out that she's a filly by Frankel, and she did seem to kind of appreciate the step up to a mile and 2 there. But on that form, she looked in great nick, and I was actually a bit surprised that she was 6-1. I thought her claims were nearly every bit as strong as sort of the market leaders in the race. Maybe Soprano deserves to be favourite, but Clove Hitch, she bolted up the last day. It's kind of hard to give her a mark because she was so impressive. She was obviously beating lesser horses, had it her own way in front, but she won't have it her own way in front here. And if she goes forward and something takes her on, that'll suit Regal Jubilee, who definitely will want a strong pace.
Well, I know as well, our friend Stephen Harris from Betting Expert is also quite keen on Clove Hitch. So again, one to keep an eye on, Regal Jubilee for Johnny. And let's move on then to the Eclipse. So we've already kind of touched on it earlier in the show. But Johnny, just take us maybe through some of your memories as well of the race in times gone by.
Yeah, I think I kind of got into racing, Joe, in round about 2003, when I suppose my earliest memory of that Cheltenham was Barry Geraghty having all the winners. And that summer then I went working in a betting shop, and I think it was that summer, and one of the kind of audios that they played was Falbrav holds Naef to win the Eclipse, and that sticks in my mind. And I think, if you remember, like, Naef is still knocked around as a stallion. If my mind recalls correctly, Falbrav beat Naef, but Naef was favourite. And then you look at the winners after that. Like, I was mad about racing right at that time. Hawkring was the year before, but refused to bend. who was obviously ex-Dermot Weld, won that for Frank Dettori. Oratorio was a horse I was a big fan of. See the Stars, who would forget him, in 2009, and only had 2 Derby winners winning the race in the last few years. One was See the Stars, the other one was Roaring Lion. The See the Stars one was one of my favourite races I think I've seen, and it was possibly the race in which he was kind of pushed hardest in his 3-year-old career. Paddington last year obviously was an amazing example of an improver for Aidan O'Brien. And you look at, Enable winning the race as well. I remember that well. Obviously, Golden Horn we'll mention going back. So You Think, great performance. Shamey Heffernan, big day for him. I seem to recall George Washington getting beaten in the race under Shamey when he was quite a tricky ride on the day. But it's a fantastic race. Like it's at a really kind of good track for the mile and two. It's the older horse taking on the younger horses. It's just a shame we don't have a stronger run in this year.
No, and obviously looking through the history as well, a lot of the favourites do deliver on this, and I mean we're expecting the City of Troy to deliver as well. But just take us through, maybe, is there any chance of an upset at all?
It's very hard to see. Like, what you have to weigh up here is, do you want to have a bet in the race? This is the type of race where I don't mind not having a bet. If City of Troy were taking on White Birch, I'd be leaning towards White Birch each way. So I feel that everything indicates that he's just improved massively as a 4-year-old. When he was taken out, it kind of made the race less of a betting race. But I do actually fancy one in it. In terms of City of Troy, like when you look at the Irish Derby, for me last weekend, I don't think that necessarily boosted the credentials of City of Troy in the sense of what he's achieved, because he beat Ambiente Friendly, who was fairly well beaten at the Curragh, and you could say, well, Los Angeles boosts the form, but they ended up in a bit of a heap, which would imply, and you look at the French horse who came over, you would imply that there isn't an awful lot between them. The City of Troy was probably a good bit better than them, but I don't think it was an outstanding derby. I'd be surprised if. If Los Angeles were running here, he wouldn't be fancied at all. I think that's fair to say. Maybe he'd be third or fourth favourite, but you wouldn't be expecting him to win. But it's Al Riffer for me. I really like his claims each way. He's a horse who has he's obviously raced very little since he races a 2-year-old. I think at one stage he was nearly favoured for the Guineas, by Wootton Bassett, obviously, who's one of the best stallions in Europe. He hasn't had that much luck, Joe, since he's kind of stepped up from his 2-year-old career. But the last day at Saratoga, Johnny Velasquez rode him. It was a bit of a messy race. If you look at his form, like when he was second last year at Deauville to Ace Impact, that's really solid form. And he's a horse who'll be ridden to come home in the race. And if you look at, say, Hans Anderson, you can forget about him. He's going to be up front. There really isn't that much that I'd be worried about elsewhere. I can't think of any of these as particularly superior to him in terms of form. Like Dancing Gemini is what, 6-7 to 1. And Al Riffa is more than double that price. That's madness to me. Like Dancing Gemini ran okay in the Derby, ran well obviously in the French Guineas, but I thought that was a very muddled, messy race. And Al Riffa for me, I don't know, is it the fact that he hasn't won in a while, or is it the fact that he's given away as a 4-year-old? But he was 25s yesterday. I thought that was madness each way, and I still think at 16s he's well worth the bet each way. For all that you're expecting that he won't win. City of Troy, I don't really see any chinks. I'm massively looking forward to him running. I think a mile and two might actually be his ideal trip, and he will have a pace to sit off. And I do imagine, as Aidan O'Brien says, he's come on from Epsom because that was an experience for him. He bombed out at Newmarket. It was such an encouraging kind of return to form for him, and I expect him to win. But you can back a 1-4 shot or whatever. You can back a 16 to 1 shot.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, just a little bit more interest, really, I guess, from the betting point of view of going for Al Riffa. And obviously, we're hoping for City of Troy just to show how good he is. Obviously, Aidan's got amazing track record in the race, 2 of the last 3 winners. So let's see if he can continue that. Now we're going to move on to Bellewstown as well. Johnny, you mentioned that you're going there as well. So just take us through the big race on Saturday.
The big race is the VA Energy Bellewstown handicap hurdle. Yeah, I'm back racing today, Joe. I've had a couple of weeks off. So it's my first trip to Bellewstown since Frankie Dettori was there for the Barney Curly fundraiser. It's a cracking meet, and this race tomorrow, the 5:58, it's a race of, I think, 29.5 grand for the winner, but it's really competitive. Just to briefly go through some of the runners, like Comfort Zone, So Scottish, and Cougar for JP McManus. really interesting horses in their own right. Gavin Cromwell, who's been in amazing form for a long time, he runs a very interesting horse in Global Expert, as well as Arrows Look, with Jack Carney claiming 5. Jack will have been better known from the flat. Another horse to mention is Alvanley rather, for Willie Mullins, who's been disappointing. Dad's Lad represents him as well. We've 16 runners as well, and I feel we're likely to have 16 runners, because I think if something is scratched, one of the reserves will get in, and one of the reserves could be Wouldn't You Agree, who won the race last year for Owen Griffin. But my selection is actually the top weight, Joe, and I was at Tipperary, was it about 38 days ago now, when Man of Workman made his return to action, and he was running a mile and a half maiden, and it looked a decent maiden. Duncan O'Brien had a strong favourite who ultimately was disappointing, but Himalayan Heights was second favourite, kind of dictated and won the race well. But the way Man of Work travelled, I was really encouraged by it. It suggests that he's come on a lot since his break. He hasn't been seen since September. If that race were run tomorrow, I'd be very confident he'd win it against Himalayan Heights. It was a good 75-80 rated type. And I was thinking after the race, this guy's gotten to go for the Galway Hurdle. He's rated 133, and on last year that wouldn't have quite gotten him in. So he probably needs to get a few pounds to be sure to get in. So I imagine with Galway, 4 weeks away, this is going to be the aim. Cian Cullinan claimed 7 again, and as much as he's given weight away, I give him a major each way chance.
And what kind of prices are you expecting here for Man of Work?
That's a tricky one, because like his form is 2-1-2, and he won his last hurdle race in the Stole. That was a strong race. He beat Oranzu Dairy. Without having I didn't do the spotlights in the racing post or anything like that, but without having, he'll definitely be an each way price. I'd say he'd be about 5-6 to 1. You might get bigger than that. And I should mention Napper Tandy as well. Napper Tandy was a famous character from Irish history, whose brother was involved heavily in a race at Bellewstown in the 18th century. So he'd be an appropriate winner for Matthew Smith. He's another horse I didn't mention, but I should also say Cougar, who was, I thought he was going to win the Fred Winter at one stage. His form has gone off a cliff, but he's now rated 120. Maybe he'll come back to form. Really looking forward to the race, but Man of Work should definitely be an each way price. You might get 7-8 to 1. I'd be expecting about 5-6 to 1.
Yeah, looking at the Formscan analysis as well on irishracing.com, Me Wee Bonnie Lass is the selection. I just thought that was a pretty nice name anyway. So let's see how that one goes. All right, moving back to the flat and over to the UK now. We're going over to Haydock for the 205. So just take us through some of your thoughts on this race, Johnny.
Yeah, Haydock's interesting actually tomorrow, and this is a 1.6 race. I just loaded up here. What did I like in it? Hampton is a horse that you definitely respect on recent form. Too bossy for us as well. I thought had a reasonable chance. Horse by Golden Horn, and what was I looking at? Dramatic Star is a very interesting runner. It's probably going to go off favourite, but kind of looks like a typical Willie Haggis improver. And we know Willie Haggis 3-year-olds by See the Stars, what they can do. I'm really looking forward to seeing Baid what he can do as a stallion. He was sent off a mad short price at Haydock the last day, but he's just a typical See the Stars, improving with experience. He's this is a 3-year-old handicap, so I wouldn't be mad on sort of backing 3-year-olds at this stage of the season in handicaps against older horses. But as much as, like, I'm not going to lie, I don't know an awful lot about how much this mark could kind of represent what he's about. He's rated 87, so you'd imagine there's more progress in him, and he's one of the least exposed kind of runners in the race as well. So yeah, he'd be for me in a very interesting little handicap.
Yeah, and again, Stephen Harris, our friend from Betting Expert, is also going for Dramatic Star. So yeah, we'll definitely keep an eye on that one. And also moving on then to the 240 at Haydock, so goes to the Lancashire Oaks. Again, Johnny, just take us through here. What are you kind of keeping an eye on here?
Yeah, I was looking at this race yesterday. I actually couldn't believe the last Irish winner of this race was Park Express, and I think that's the 1980s. Park Express was, as far as I can remember, the dam of New Approach, and New Approach was her last foal. And when New Approach was born, she was all but blind, so they had to put a bed around New Approach so that she'd know where he was at all times. And that's how far back Irish winners go in this race. For some reason, Irish horses don't run in it. I'm actually really intrigued by Colossal here, who's a second run for Jamie Osborne. Ran the last day under Safi in the Duke of Edinburgh Stakes, was sent off fancy price 66 to 1. But to be fair, that was the mare's first run since she was 7th in Baden-Baden in October. Now, she was awarded a race in Baden-Baden in the previous September, but her German form seems very, very solid. She's given a rating of 104. She ran off 105 at Ascot, but she was quite keen, and she practically ran to her mark. So for me, she's put in at a massive price here. I was surprised how big she was, and I think it's kind of people underestimating the German form. Tiffany's very interested for Sir Mark Prescott. Unbelievable improvement from rating of 70, and looked better than ever the last year. She's obviously German form as well, having won a small kind of listed race early on in the season, but brilliant at Newcastle the last day.
Yeah, that's it. I think Tiffany was the one that caught my eye as well. Will be probably the worthy favourite given the form figures. So yeah, I think that's a bold selection for you there, Johnny. But let's see if the 50-1 value can come in. That'd be a lovely little tip for us. And then moving on, then the last race we're going to look at from Haydock is the 315 to the Bet365 Old Newton Cup. Plenty of prize money on offer for this one, Johnny. 19 declared as well. Take us through it.
Yeah, it's just British racing, British flat racing at the moment. We knock our racing a lot in Ireland and Britain, but British flat racing is really, really strong. Royal Ascot was superb, and every Saturday now you've really competitive smashing flat racing, and I like Chillingham here for Kevin Stott. He's a horse I kind of like Ulysses as a stallion. He's a cheap enough stallion, but his horses tend to progress and tend to improve. He's rock solid, this horse, be it a mile and a half on good soft ground. He ran a rock solid race the last day. He never really threatened to win at York, but he stayed on well for pressure, and that was strong form behind Crystal Delight. He's running off the same mark here. Maybe 16 mightn't be an ideal draw, but I don't see any negatives really to him in terms of an each way bet. And Relentless Voyager, another Ulysses in the race, keep an eye on.
Again, yeah, when you said you touched on the draw here, but I mean, how much of that can be a factor in these kind of races?
It depends on the track, to be fair, but like even over mile, like if you're drawing a mile and a half in Galway, and you're drawing 20, it's a major problem, because if you're turning much of the time, Haydock wouldn't quite be like that, but sometimes, by contrast, if you're drawn low and you think that's a bonus, but the horse doesn't necessarily break that well, that can be a problem as well, because you can end up behind a wall of horses. So it does depend on the track. Dundalk's a really interesting track for the draw as well. That's kind of something I follow a lot, but obviously it wouldn't be as much of a factor here, but I would prefer draw 7 or 8 and 9 in the middle.
Yeah, just looking here at the draw analysis as well on irishracing.com, nothing really kind of to say that draw 16 should actually do well, but it is gaining more wins than expected, so on very limited data, of course, but yeah, just something to keep an eye on. You can kind of dig into that more as well on the website if you feel like it. And the final tip we have for you as well is from our friend Vincent in the 8 o'clock Bellewstown on Saturday, and he's also looking at Como Park. I don't know, Johnny, if you had an opinion on that one.
Yeah, Como Park's a horse that's good horse off the flat, who I have to refresh my knowledge here a little bit, was with Joseph O'Brien, and I haven't fully looked now with Timmy de Bromhead, of course, was actually steps up to 3 miles tomorrow, which is interesting. This is a horse that I was following this horse a bit as a juvenile hurdler with Henry. Ran very well at Navan the first day, bombed out at Cork when I fancied him the next day. He finally got off the mark at Cork the last day. He's by Camelot. Whether he'll get 3 miles or not is an interesting one for me, but he ran behind a very progressive 4-year-old in Harsh at Punchdown the last day. Very interesting to see how that trip works out. Wouldn't necessarily be obvious. Just looking at the pedigree here as well. Half brother to the 2.5 mile winner. But yeah, that's an interesting one. I haven't, to be honest, studied that race in depth at the moment. Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that for Vincent as well. And Johnny, just to round off the show, just your best bet of the weekend? I'll give Man a work at Bellewstown. Perfect.
Well, that wraps it up for today's edition of Formscan. Hopefully we've picked you some winners. Be sure to let us know how you get on in the comments below. And if you do place a bet, as always, please gamble safely. Johnny and Emma and Vincent and the team will be back for the Irish Angle on Monday. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you again very soon.